Hey everyone! I'm sure most of you have heard those freeze warnings, especially as we get into these shoulder seasons, like late fall and early spring.
Yeah,
But do you really know what goes into them?
right.
We got a bunch of questions from you about them, and we thought this is the perfect opportunity to take a deep dive.
A deep dive.
To uncover all the fascinating stuff behind those freeze warnings and maybe even highlight a thing or two you didn't realize.
Definitely. Like the fact that the National Weather Service, the NWS,
Right.
they have a super precise definition of what actually triggers one of those warnings.
Yeah, fill us in. What is it? What is it about?
Okay, so it's not just any old freeze.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's got to be a situation where they're forecasting those air temperatures, the ones we all feel,
Right.
to drop down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or even lower, which, and here's the kicker, is 0 degrees Celsius for those of you who use that.
Right.
But importantly, it's all about timing. This is going to be happening during what they call the growing season. You know that time when those more delicate plants are actually, doing their thing.
Out there, vulnerable.
Vulnerable, exactly. Because that 32-degree mark, that's like the point of no return. You hit that, and things can start getting really dicey for those plants.
So it's not just about like any random frost in the middle of winter. It's got to be when those plants are actually actively growing.
Yeah, when they're at their most vulnerable.
Right.
And this is super interesting.
Okay.
So the local NWS offices, they have a little wiggle room, so to speak.
Wiggle room.
Yeah, like sure, 32 degrees is that general, hey, pay attention number, but they don't just blindly issue a warning if it dips there for like 5 minutes.
Okay.
They actually consider how long that cold's going to hang around.
Ah, so duration matters.
It totally does. And get this, they even think about the types of crops that are, common in their area.
So specific plants?
Absolutely. Because some plants are like, bring on the cold, and others are super sensitive.
So it's like a localized, customized freeze warning almost.
Totally. It's all about assessing the real risk to those plants.
So a quick dip to 30 degrees for, a half hour in one place might not set off the alarm bells, but a full night at 32 in an area known for, I don't know, delicate peaches or something could be a huge deal.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about connecting the dots between the temperature, the duration, and what's actually at risk. And thinking about it, these warnings, they're most frequent during those tricky transition times.
Yeah, you're right. Like late fall when winter's about to pounce.
Exactly. And in some places, it's all winter long.
Right.
And then, of course, early spring when everything's just starting to pop up again.
When that surprise frost hits and you're like, no.
It could be devastating to your garden. That's when those really frigid, dry air masses from the Arctic, way up north,
Yeah.
they decide to take a trip south.
Bringing the cold with them.
Big time. And those areas, they're not always prepared for that kind of deep chill.
So these aren't just those general, hey, bundle up warnings. It's very targeted, right?
They are super specific.
Okay.
Like down to the county level or even smaller zones.
Right.
They really want to make sure that you're only getting alerts that actually apply to you.
That makes sense. So no need to panic if your area isn't mentioned.
No.
Okay, so now we know what triggers these warnings and how targeted they are. But beyond grabbing a warmer coat, why should we really care?
So let's look at the big picture here.
Okay.
These warnings are all about protecting things,
Yeah.
people, your stuff, and agriculture, which is kind of a big deal for everyone.
Right.
The most immediate thing you're likely to see is damage to plants. Like our sources explained, and this blew my mind, when it gets below freezing, ice crystals can actually form inside those plant cells.
Inside the cells.
Yeah, which messes up their whole structure. You can imagine how bad that is.
Yeah, no good.
And of course, that means big trouble for farmers and even your backyard garden.
Nobody wants to see all their hard work just wilt away.
And it's not just plants that are at risk. We always hear about pipes freezing and bursting.
Oh, yeah. That's a homeowner's nightmare.
Seriously. So when water freezes, it expands, creating this huge pressure inside those pipes.
Right.
And if they're not insulated, especially the ones outside or in unheated spaces, they can crack or even burst.
That's a recipe for a flooded basement.
And a huge repair bill.
Exactly. So plants, pipes. What about animals? They're built for the outdoors, right?
Well, some animals are definitely better equipped for cold than others.
Mm-hmm.
But prolonged exposure to freezing temps can still be really bad for them.
Makes sense.
Especially pets that spend a lot of time outside.
Yeah.
Or livestock without proper shelter.
Right.
And even wildlife can struggle when the temperatures plummet.
Okay, so it's not just about staying warm ourselves, it's about thinking about all the living things around us. And
Absolutely.
what about travel? I mean, I know ice can be a problem.
Oh, absolutely. We've got to talk about freezing rain, even just a little moisture on those roads. When it gets below freezing, you get black ice. It's so dangerous.
Yeah,
It's
it
invisible.
looks just like wet pavement. It's a recipe for disaster if you're not careful.
So slow down. Be extra cautious.
Uh,
All right, so we've talked about the impacts on plants, pipes, animals, travel. It's kind of a chain reaction.
it is.
Now, back to the science for a minute. There's got to be a reason why these freezes happen, right?
Okay, so buckle up. Let's get into the meteorology.
All right, lay it on us.
The main culprit here is Arctic air masses.
The Arctic, those are serious.
Super cold, super dry air masses that originate, like you said, up in the polar regions.
Yeah.
And when those decide to head south, oh boy, watch out. Temperatures drop big time.
So like a polar express of cold air.
Exactly. Then you've got this process called radiational cooling.
Radiational cooling sounds intense.
It happens on those clear nights with no clouds.
Okay.
Basically, the ground loses its heat, radiates it out into the atmosphere, and the clouds normally trap that heat, right?
We do. But without them, the ground gets super cold, and so does the air right above it.
That explains why sometimes you see frost, even if the official temperature wasn't quite that low.
Precisely. The ground level is its own microclimate.
Yeah.
Now, wind chill isn't directly tied to a freeze warning, but it's still important.
Okay, good point.
Wind chill is that it feels like temperature, and that's what really gets you. The wind just sucks the heat right out of you.
Making it feel even colder than it already is.
Exactly. And so much more dangerous if you're outside for any length of time.
So bundle up. All right, so we've got these Arctic blasts, radiational cooling, and that sneaky wind chill. That's a lot to keep track of. Who's watching all this?
That's where the NWS comes in. They are the heroes in this story.
So they're constantly monitoring all these factors.
24/7, they've got a whole network of weather stations out there, and they use those to feed these super sophisticated computer models to predict when things are going to get frosty.
So it's a constant analysis.
Oh yeah, they're looking at temperature readings, wind patterns, cloud cover, you name it, trying to get ahead of those freezing temps.
It's like a giant weather puzzle they're trying to solve to keep us all safe.
It is a really important one.
And once they've put the pieces together and they see that freeze coming, what happens?
All right, this is where the communication comes in.
Okay.
They're not just going to sit on that information.
No way.
They've got to get the word out to you.
Right.
So first off, there's NOAA Weather Radio. That's
Okay.
your lifeline for constant weather updates. Then you've got their websites and mobile apps.
Easy to access.
Exactly. They're constantly updating those.
Okay.
Then they work really closely with local news, TV, and radio stations to spread the word.
Makes sense. That's how a lot of people get their news.
Totally. And these days, they're using those wireless emergency alerts, the ones that pop up on your phone.
Oh, yeah. Those are hard to miss.
They want to make sure you get the message. So yeah, they're really using every tool they've got to keep you informed.
It's reassuring to know they're going to that much effort to reach us. Now, let's say you hear that freeze warning. What should you do?
Time to take action.
Give us the rundown.
First things first, protect those plants.
All right. Plants first?
If you've got sensitive plants, cover them up.
With what?
Blankets, sheets, even cardboard can do the trick.
Okay, I've got some old blankets.
Perfect. And if they're in pots, bring them inside if you can.
Much safer.
And here's a little tip. You ready for this?
Yeah, hit me.
Watering your plants thoroughly before a freeze can actually help.
Really?
Yeah, the water as it starts to freeze releases a little bit of heat, and the ice that forms can act as a bit of insulation.
That's pretty clever. Okay, what about my house?
Okay, so pipes are the big one here.
Yeah.
Insulate any exposed pipes. You have the ones on those outside walls or in cold spaces like the basement or crawl space.
Okay, got it.
Another trick, let your faucets drip a little bit. That moving water is less likely to freeze.
Huh, good tip.
And always know where your main water shutoff valve is, just in case a pipe does burst.
Better safe than sorry. What about the furry family members?
Bring those pets inside, no question.
Yeah, of course.
And if you have livestock, make sure they've got warm, dry shelter.
Okay, so we've covered the house, the plants, the animals. What about if you absolutely have to travel during a freeze warning?
Okay, so if you're hitting the road, extra caution is key.
Right.
Watch out for icy patches, especially on bridges and overpasses. They freeze first.
Yeah, they're always slick.
And give yourself extra time. No need to rush.
Good advice. So it's all about being proactive and taking those simple steps to avoid a bigger headache later.
Exactly. A little prep work goes a long way.
And you mentioned earlier how freeze warnings can be different depending on where you live.
Oh, yeah. Regional variations are a huge deal.
Okay, break that down for us.
So places in the south, where it's usually warm, they can get hit harder by a freeze.
Really?
Yeah, their plants and even their houses aren't always built for the cold.
So like those palm trees in Florida.
Exactly. And their pipes might not have as much insulation because they don't normally need it.
So a quick freeze could do a lot of damage.
It could. And those southern plants, they haven't had to adapt to freezing the way northern plants have.
Right.
But then again, up north, even though they're used to the cold, they still need to watch out during their growing seasons.
Yeah, a late frost can ruin everything.
Totally. So the impact of a freeze warning, it really depends on where you are and what's normal for that area.
So it's not just about the number on the thermometer, it's about the context.
Precisely. The big picture.
So for our listeners out there, what's the one thing they should keep in mind when they hear that freeze warning?
Here's a question for everyone to think about.
Okay.
With all the weird weather we've been seeing, all the changes, how's that going to affect those freeze warnings in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Will they be as predictable? Will different regions be more or less affected?
So many unknowns.
It's something to consider as we move forward, especially with those changing weather patterns.
It definitely makes you think.
It does.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into freeze warnings.
It has.
We've uncovered the science, the risks, and even some tips for staying safe.
Hopefully everyone's feeling a bit more prepared now.
We hope so too. Stay warm out there, everyone.
And stay informed.